Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing the second section of Chapter 11 and development. And starting in infancy, humans develop their ability to think and understand, and this is called cognitive development. So there are three essential tasks of cognitive development. During this development, we come to understand how the physical world works, how our minds represent it, and how other minds represent it as well. In the first half of the 1900s, Swiss biologist Jean Piaget, who is the father of modern developmental psychology, began researching whether babies have the ability to think. And through his research, he determined that children go through stages of cognitive development, which we will talk about next. So Piaget's stages of cognitive development started with the sensory motor stage. And this stage began at birth and lasted until 2 years. And so during this stage, infants use their ability to sense and to move to gain information about their environment using their eyes, their mouths, and their fingers. So he believed they began to construct schemas during this stage. For example, they learn that if they tug on their stuffed animal, it makes their stuffed animal move closer to them. And so they develop this schema or this knowledge of the world. So they're also able to assimilate information by gaining or applying their schemas to new situations. So if I want a different object such as a ball or a rattle, I can tug on it and it will move closer to me. Accommodation occurs when infants apply a revision to their schemas in light of new information. So one example of this is if I tug on my cat's tail, it runs away or scratches me. So toys, not cats, come closer after tugging. And so at this stage, infants do not conceptualize also this object permanence that Piaget discussed. And so object permanence is where they have not yet developed the understanding that objects continue to exist even when they're not visible. So this is why it's fun to play peekaboo with infants, and they're surprised that you appear when you move your hands away. They have yet to develop this object permanence. So here we have an example of these terms with our little buddy Max. And Max has a new chair. The buttons light up and play music when you push the buttons. So Max does this several times and gets the idea or develops a schema that pushing the buttons on his chair leads to music and lights coming on. So Max then applies the schema and pushes a button on the DVD remote, but lights and music do not occur after pushing. So Max revises or accommodates his schema to include buttons on toys, but not buttons on other things, will lead to lights and music. So following infancy, according to Piaget, our childhood consists of 2 stages. So the following stages are where they begin to develop this higher order thinking that we often discuss in class. And so the pre-operational stage occurs between the ages of 2 and 6 years of age. And so toddlers learn more about physical or concrete objects. And during this stage, they cannot create mental representations of the world. So it's not until a concrete operational stage that children realize that the way the world appears is not necessarily the way it is. So we'll get more into this in the next few stages. So the concrete operational stage, which occurs between the ages of 6 and 11, we see children develop the ability of conservation. And so conservation is our understanding that although the physical properties of an object change, the quantitative properties stay the same. So one example of this may be your little brother may get mad at you because he thinks you gave yourself more pop, although you split evenly between both yours and his glasses. So it just happens that your glass is tall and skinny and his glass is short and bigger. And so this is the idea of conservation that they have yet to develop, or they will develop within this stage, but before have not yet developed it. So the formal operational stage occurs after children are 11 years old. And so they gain the ability to solve non-physical or abstract problems and are able to reason systematically about abstract concepts like the terms liberty and love, and understand the difference between events that will happen, might have happened, or have not happened. So given the stages of cognitive development, what did Piaget get wrong? So research has demonstrated that children can perform mature behaviors one day, yet less mature behaviors on the next day. So children acquire many of these abilities much earlier than Piaget realized, such as learning object permanence at 4 months rather than 2 years, and overcome egocentrism at 13 months rather than many years. So further, a Russian psychologist named Vygotsky believed that cognitive development is due to the child's interaction with other people. And so cultural tools such as language and counting systems exert a strong influence on cognitive development, which were not considered in Piaget's original stages of cognitive development. And so as children develop, they discover their own minds, but they also discover the minds of other people around them. So during the pre-operational stage, children cannot fully grasp the fact that others may mentally represent the same objects in different ways. So basically, they don't understand that people do not see the world as they do. So this is what is known as egocentrism. And so egocentrism is the failure to understand that the world appears differently to different observers. So when a 3-year-old is asked what a person on the opposite side of a table is seeing, they typically think that the other person sees what they're seeing. And so similarly, they have trouble understanding that other people may not know what they know. And so 18-month-old toddlers seem to understand that different people can like and desire different things. However, it takes them a long time to understand that other people may have different emotional reactions than they do. So it's not until 6 years do children realize that Little Red Riding Hood, who doesn't know she's about to be eaten by the big bad wolf, will not be afraid when entering her grandmother's house. So when children come to understand that others have minds and that minds and their minds represent the world in different ways, they are said to develop this theory of mind. And so 2 groups of children actually lag behind their peers in acquiring this understanding. And it's believed that children with the diagnosis of autism fail to acquire a theory of mind, leading to a difficulty in communicating with other people and making friends, even though these individuals often score within the average to above average IQ score on intellectual dimensions. And secondly, children who are born deaf and whose parents do not know sign language are slow to learn to communicate because they don't have readily access to communicate with someone. And this lack of access seems to slow their understanding of other people's perspectives and this theory of mind. So even at 5 and 6 years of age, they experience difficulty acquiring this theory of mind, where we typically see other children being able to use this theory of mind and understand that not everyone sees the world as they do. So the age at which children acquire theory of mind also depends on the number of siblings, the frequency of pretend play, and even socioeconomic status. But language is most important, and so language skills are an excellent predictor of how well they perform on false belief tests, which is a measure of theory of mind. Also, the way that caregivers communicate with children influence the development of this ability. So children whose caregivers frequently talk about thoughts and feelings tend to be good at understanding others' beliefs and belief-based emotions. This slide talks about when learning from others, what are 3 skills that are fundamental to that learning. And so this includes joint attention, which is the ability to focus on what another person is focused on. So one example of this is 9 and 3-month-old infants. And if a mother looks to the left, both of these infants will look to the left as well. However, if the mom closes her eyes and then looks to the left, the 3-month-old will follow suit, close their eyes and look to the left. The 9-month-old will just automatically look to the left. And so this suggests that older infants are trying to see what the mother is looking at rather than just following her head movements. And so this is where that joint attention comes from and their ability to develop this. And so social referencing skills are the ability to use another person's reactions as information about the world. So an infant approaching a new toy will often turn towards their mother or their father and look at them to see their reaction towards that toy and whether it's safe or not. And so the last skill is imitation. And imitation is the ability to do what a person does or is meant to do. So one example of this is an 18-month-old infant sees dad try opening a jar, maybe a peanut butter, and the dad's hand slips trying to pull the lid off the jar. As what we see with the 18-month-old is that he won't copy that slip up. He'll copy the intended action of opening the jar. And so these 3 skills allow infants to learn more sophisticated skills than those of other species. So here we take a turn and discuss how we develop socially. So during World War II, psychologists found that infants living in orphanages awaiting adoption often became physically or developmentally delayed, and nearly 2/5 of them died before they could be adopted. So shortly thereafter, Harry Harlow found that socially isolated rhesus monkeys with the choice of 2 artificial mothers, one made of wire that dispensed food, and one made of cloth with no food, they would spend the majority of time clinging to the soft cloth mother despite the lack of nourishment that she could provide. And further studies found that baby rhesus monkeys that were warm, safe, and well fed, but allowed no social contact with other monkeys, developed a variety of pathologies. And so this included compulsively rocking back and forth while biting themselves, avoiding other monkeys, so avoiding social contact. They were incapable of communicating with or learning from others. And when mature, they ignored, they rejected, or attacked their own babies. So Harlow's experiment suggests that infants wanted something more from their caregivers, more than just sustenance. So this leads us to discussing imprinting. And so the chapter talks about imprinting as being discovered by Konrad Lorenz, who won a Nobel Prize for his discovery when newly hatched goslings follow the first moving object that it sees. And so this is where we turn to talk about social development and how do we actually develop with our caregivers, and this really leads us to talking about that attachment with the caregiver. So talking about the rhesus monkeys and imprinting or developing that bond with the caregiver. And so here we have psychiatrist John Bowlby, who found that babies were innately signaling to their primary caregiver by crying or cooing to have their needs met. And he attributed this to the infants' attachment styles with their caregivers. So the attachment of an infant has with their caregiver is actually a social reflex, which includes forming an emotional bond with the caregiver. So Mary Ainsworth first measured attachment using the strange situation, and she measured attachment by bringing in a child and their primary caregiver, primarily or usually mom, and so they brought them into the laboratory and staged series of episodes. And one particular staging included the mom leaving the room and then returning and observing the reaction of the infant. And she believed that the behavior in the strange situation correlates fairly well with the behavior at home. So the capacity for attachment is innate for any of us as humans, but the quality of attachment is influenced by the child, the caregiver, and their interaction with one another. And so infants seem to keep track of their caregiver's responsiveness and form an internal working model of relationships. So if my mother and father are warm and nurturing, then I began to understand that I can go up to them, I can hug them, I can climb on them and call out to them and have them answer to me, as opposed to a closed off, more cold relationship. And so this leads us to talking about the development of 4 attachment styles, which include secure, avoidant, ambivalent, and disorganized. And so secure attachment styles occur in about 60% of infants, and this 60% of American infants. And these infants are distressed by the absence of their mother and then are calmed down by her return to the room. Those who were not distressed when she left acknowledged her return with a glance or a greeting. Avoidance styles, which occur in about 20% of relationships, are observed when the infant is not distressed by the mother leaving and do not acknowledge her return when she comes back in the room. Ambivalent occurs in about 15% of relationships and is characterized by the infant being distressed by her absence, mad when she comes back, and rebuffing her attempts to calm them down when she does return, and arching their back, trying to swarm away. And then lastly, what we see is disorganized, which occurs in about 5% or less, with no consistent pattern or pattern of responses from the baby. So secure attachment is most common all over the world, but styles differ across different cultures. So one example of this is that German children whose parents foster independence are more likely to be avoidant than ambivalent. And so a large study examined whether leaving children at a daycare impacted the attachment between mothers and children. And so this is a very kind of hot topic issue because mothers may feel that draw to keep that attachment, to stay home with their child, but that's not the way our culture works, or the mother may be the main breadwinner for the family. So the study found that daycare had little effect on the mother-child attachment. However, infants with insensitive mothers and a poor daycare, when paired together, they were more likely to have insecure attachment. So the study was particularly important considering the shift in our culture where the majority of mothers now work and place their children in daycare. So the relationship between the child and the caregiver shapes the child's temperament, which is a relatively stable pattern of emotional reactivity, or can basically be described as the child's personality. And so the child's early temperament has been found to influence their emotional and behavioral functioning for the rest of their lives. And so as we've demonstrated, mother's sensitivity and responsiveness to their child influences the child's temperament. And so this wraps up the second part of Chapter 11 and development.